everybody. This is Suzette Martinez Standring with It's All Right with Suzette. And today we have a very timely topic, mental health. The pandemic has caused a lot of stress and a lot of need for help and support. And today we have a wonderful guest that will give us an insight into what it's like to practice as a psychiatrist. And on the other side, if you're considering counseling, what you could expect. Her new book, Practice, 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 This Psychiatrist's Life, is written by Daniela Gitlin, and I found it to be poignant, informational, educational, entertaining, well written, and it's such a pleasure to have Daniela on our show today. Daniela Gitlin is a rural psychiatrist in general adult practice for almost 30 years in upstate New York. She describes herself as a psychotherapist who prescribes, and she writes regularly for the Psychotherapy Networker. And we'll talk a little bit later at the end of the show how you can get in touch with her and get her book. Welcome, Daniela. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I read your book, absolutely loved it. It was so engaging. It's a very, very fresh perspective on mental health, written from your personal point of view as a practicing psychiatrist. Please tell us what the reader can expect. What is your book about and how is it formatted?
Well, it's written as a series of interconnected clinical stories, written against the backdrop of my life. And these stories are generally of patients I've been working with for many, many years, some decades. And, how does the person affect me? What do I do to use that to move, how do I use that to move the treatment forward? It's a very immersive book. I want the people, the reader to have my experience of being with a patient. And in writing it that way, I think it gives it's immersive. It allows you to see how I'm thinking and figure out if you can use that way of thinking instead of me giving a lecture, for instance, or writing it as a self-help book. It's also amusing. There's some straightforward humor pieces. There are pieces from my personal life, and how the two, my professional, my personal life, intersect, and how I use my database to manage my personal life, how it benefits me.
I absolutely enjoyed your book. And I thought, and the reason, and I want the viewers to know that why I think it's so unique and fresh is because oftentimes we read books about mental health and all of that. It can sometimes be a little dry and confusing, but you write from a very personal point of view. And so much of your spirit and your personality comes through in the book. And I absolutely love the individual stories because they show the reader, number one, oh, that could be me. And it shows the interaction of how they move through obstacles and barriers in a really, like I say, sometimes amusing, but often poignant and insightful way. Now, when you were compiling this information for this book, how did you go about it? Did you keep a journal? I mean, when did this idea for a very unique perspective on mental health come to you?
Oh, I've had this idea in my head for decades. I mean, patients are fascinating. And the thing is, how I had trouble finding the way in. When, as a writer, which I consider myself a writer too, as a writer, you have to find the way in. The thing that organizes the material. And I kept writing these stories and they just didn't work. And I couldn't figure out why. I don't know how these things happen, but it came to me that my favorite, I'm an avid reader, have always been an avid reader. I'm going to brag on myself. I've read 120 books so far this year. So, I read a lot. And it came to me as kind of an epiphany that my favorite protagonist is intelligent, competent, and up against all kinds of adversity. And what keeps me reading is seeing how that protagonist is going to solve the problems. Are they going to prevail? Are they going to fail? What's going to happen? And that's when I had my aha moment. And I reread one of my stories, the one that actually is the opening clinical story of the book. And I realized that the flaw in that story was that I had glossed over the only interesting thing in it, which was my screw up. I had screwed up. And so how did I fix that? How did I deal with that? How did I manage to, resolve the error? Because I ended up hurting the patient inadvertently, and it was a very vulnerable patient. And yet help, in addition to solving the problem, be helpful. So that was my way in. I saw it. I went, oh, that's the way. And I wrote 13 chapter drafts in 13 days. I mean, it was so easy once I realized that I had actually been holding back from that, because it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to admit you screw up. But there are so many ways that things go wrong in the session. And, if there's time at the end of our talk, I'll tell you a story where a patient ambushed me and how I dealt with that. So,
Okay.
there's so many things that go wrong. And that's really the only thing that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. You're so right, because one of my colleagues, Dave Lieber, says readers learn from failure more than they learn from success. And I know the story that you're referring to in your book. And what I found so refreshing was your vulnerability. You admit, oh, took a wrong turn here, but by listening deeply and really processing what that person needed, you were both able to get delivered safely to the other side with a surprising insight. That's what I really love, because your stories talk about the complexity of a person's emotional makeup. How do you navigate through all of that? And one of the things that I'd love to talk to you about is, in your book, you made me laugh when you say people who are unfamiliar with psychiatry often say to you, well, what exactly are you doing? You're just sitting there. Why am I paying you to just sit there and listen? And you gave a really insightful answer that I think everybody should be privy to, that psychiatrists, good ones like yourself, are not just sitting there.
Yeah, no, we're not just sitting
Explain
there.
a little bit about what's involved in being immersively involved in listening.
Well, the thing is, the way that I answer this question when people ask me is, I say, ask yourself, do you have even one friend that will listen to you for 45 minutes? No, wait, let's back up. 5 minutes, giving you their complete undivided attention, thinking only about what they could say that would be of service to you. Well, most people will say, no, I don't have even one friend like that. Because when we are talking with our friends, we always have our own personal agenda. We're thinking about how we're going to respond. We're thinking about, how we had a similar experience, whatever. I mean, my husband, who's a psychiatrist, on a good day, when he's well rested, hasn't had any problems at work, might give me 5 or 10 minutes of his undivided attention. And that's my husband, who's a psychiatrist. So it's a very special kind of listening. And it's a listening that requires that, you put aside your own personal needs. Anything that you're responding with, any emotional reaction, anything that's happening with me when I'm listening to a person I'm with, I'm thinking, is this me? Is this my problem? Or is this a response to something about them? And what does it tell me about them? And how can I use this reaction to help them, share it in some way that's useful to them? So really, it's a complete, the listening is a complete concentration on the needs of the other person. And, it becomes a habit. So it's hard for me to make small talk in a way now. But I'm glad that I have that skill set, because it helps me too in my personal life.
And it is, in fact, a discipline and a skill set that only very special training can deliver.
Yes, I mean,
And
it's an involved training.
yes, it
After I
is.
finished,
A-
the residency was 4 years, and for 4 years after, I went on for more training in psychotherapy.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
it's involved.
We're going to take a short break. And when we return, we're going to plumb the depths of Dr. Daniela Gitlin's thought processes on mental health and her experiences as a psychiatrist. And we'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned. And we're back with Dr. Daniela Gitlin, a psychiatrist who has written a most engaging new book, Practice, 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 This Psychiatrist's Life. Now, before we get on to a really interesting story that she's going to share with us, I would like to ask you, who's your audience, Daniela?
Well, I wrote the book for the curious, intelligent reader who wants to actually know more about therapy and psychiatry. But as I was writing it, I realized that the nature of the stories, given that most of, pretty much every chapter deals with some issue that I have to deal with and how do I prevail, really would be useful for stressed new therapists and psychiatrists to reassure them that, making errors is actually, it's part of the work. I also wrote it for people considering going into the field. And really I'll say this is my secret desire is that seasoned mental health educators will find the book useful to teach. But, I'd be happy if curious lay readers were like, oh, so this is what it's about. That would be good.
I actually thought it would make a great book for training because it's so real and it's so real life. The kind of thing that you can't really learn in, just by studying it in a classroom. You have to learn through experience. And so you've done the hard work of sharing what those experiences are, warts and all.
Right.
And which leads me to tell our viewers, there are so many interesting stories that she's written, short chapters on actual conditions and issues that patients have had that on the first, when you become familiar with it, you say, oh, this is a tough one. How are you going to get through this one? And it's always handled with such compassion, grace, and insight. So I would like you to share one of your favorite patient stories with us.
Well, one of my, something that happens a lot is that the patient will ambush me. And, when I was a greener therapist, that was always, I just would become so defensive and upset. But, I've gotten better at this. So one of my favorite stories is, it's a bit of a spoiler, but I'm going to tell it in full. It's a chapter called Good Cop, Bad Cop. And I've been working with this lady, Linda, for, I don't know, maybe 10 years, very well-established relationship. She had intermittent depression and attention deficit disorder. And ADD is a disorder, it's a lifetime disorder of inattention, distractibility, poor future planning. And, we had achieved the medication equilibrium of maximum benefit with minimum problems. So there was really nothing more I was going to be able to do with her medicine. So there we were, it was a winter day. My my co-therapist, 14-pound poodle oodle is, sitting at her feet. And she asks me to waive a missed appointment fee. So, I'm in private practice. I get no subsidies from anybody. And our office policy is that we charge for missed appointments or cancellations within 24 hours. And for many years, we had trouble enforcing that because we're so soft-hearted. But we almost became insolvent. So we've become strict about this. So she asks me to waive the fee, and I have that. Oh God! Now I'm going to have to say no, and she's going to get pissed off. So I flipped through the chart, And I see that she's missed several over the past few years. And I said, well, you know, I see you've missed a few, and, you know, knowing myself, I've probably already waived a couple fees. So, you know, I can't this time. And she says she's mad. And you know, she's okay, I understand. And I had this wave of, oh no, you know, now I have to deal with this. And what you have to understand about me, and this is true for any therapist, and any therapist has built-in biases and problems of their own, right? I'm a person. So I'm a pleaser and an enabler, and, you know, in recovery for many years. And so I have what I call a don't be a wimp checklist that I run through whenever I encounter this reaction in myself. And I remind myself that just as a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, I'm only as clinically effective as my personal limitations. And it's not my job to pad someone from the consequences of their actions. And not just that, it's disrespectful and unhelpful. So then I just have to kind of give myself an internal shake and say, get over yourself, you know, do your job. So I surface from this introspective moment, and I see that she's petting my poodle oodle on her belly, and the dog is like this in bliss, you know. And she notices that I've come back, and she leans down and says sotto voce into poodle oodle's ear, well, she can't help being a bitch, can she? And you know how when you're completely shocked, you know, all the sound just gets sucked out of the room, and nobody moved and nobody breathed. And, you know, obviously she knew she'd gone too far. And what was I going to do? I didn't know. And all of a sudden I just burst out laughing because, you know, she's so sly. It just was just so funny to me that she would, you know, indirectly jab me like this. And when I laughed like that, she started laughing too. And we had this wonderful belly laugh moment together. And I wound down first, and I wiped my eyes with a tissue and said, oh, well, phew. She said, well, I had to give it the old college try. And I said, yep, we're even. And we went on, you know, to process the moment. And after the fact, when I thought about it, you know, this was one of those clinical interventions that you can't plan because it was magic. It was the perfect thing to do. It affirmed her power to affect me, which, you know, patients need to know that they can affect their therapist. But look at how affirming it was. She made me laugh. And not only that, because I laughed, she got the message that she was completely ridiculous and out of line, but in a nice way, you know? So I know, and she's never asked me again to waive a fee. And in thinking even further about it after the fact, I realized that I had grown to another level with my own tendency to enable people in this kind of nonsense. And, you know, therapy is really in its best moments. It's being truly connected, both of you, to each other. And that human connection is growthful for me as well as a therapist. It's not just good for the patient, although that's of course the point. It's kind of an extra lagniappe if I get something too. But you know, the more I learn about myself, the better therapist I am. So this is one of my favorite stories because, first of all, it was a magic moment. You can't plan those. They just come. So there was, you know, it was like everything in me rose to meet the occasion. And that's just a wonderful feeling as a professional, you know, when all of your skills come together.
Yes, I do think that that exemplifies, you know, one could say, oh, that was really quick thinking, or that was a very positive reaction. But I think it goes into the pot of being fully and concentrating fully on your patient, what the issues are in the background, and meeting them in a very grateful and authentic way.
Yeah, like being fully present, being fully present.
Being fully present. And there are many, many stories like that because, you know, when you talk about it, it's, oh, there's a million ways that could go. that could go into veer into a bad neighborhood. So that's good. And it leads me to my next question. What does it take for you as a working psychiatrist not to burn out with all the sadness and misery that you're immersed in your professional life?
Well, I define burnout as a state of disengagement. And and that manifests in lots of different ways for different therapists. In my case, it manifests as a state of boredom. I'm never bored in session, and if I am, there's a problem. So the antidote is to find a way to be connected to the patient so as to experience a moment of aliveness and, bonding with the person. And that requires that you not be cookie cutter. You have to sometimes take risks, like the way I burst out laughing with my patient, Linda. I would consider that, a risky moment after the fact, because it's not, I didn't think it through ahead of time. I didn't weigh all the pros and cons. I just did it. And that requires a certain level of comfort with the possibility that whatever you do is going to go wrong. You have to be willing to then be prepared to deal with that. And so when you take these kinds of risks to stay connected and engaged with a person, when it works out, it builds your confidence. And when it doesn't work out, the opportunity is to let it teach you something about the person and about yourself. And then you have to, think again about what to do to clean that up, if possible. Sometimes it's not possible, but most of the time I find, these things just, something happens and it was, I can do something with that. But the organizing principle has to be that I'm not thinking about myself like, oh my God, I screwed up. One of the things that I've learned over time, with experience, is that often what feels like a mistake when it happens actually is not. But you have to be willing to not get derailed by that. And that's, a skill that comes with time and experience and confidence. And what it requires is embracing the reality that you're going to make a mistake. It's inevitable. If you're always on edge worrying about making a mistake, you're not engaged with the patient.
Now, that is really good advice for the new psychiatrists, because I'm sure that they operate under this myth that everything they say and do is going to be perfect. Now, on the other side of the fence, for those who are considering going to a psychiatrist, and we just have a few minutes here, do you want to address some of the common myths that they come in with and help them to maybe understand or set the record straight of what can be expected and what they might get out of it? Like, what are some of the common fears that you know about people who are thinking about seeing a psychiatrist?
People are so worried that psychiatrists and therapists can read their minds. I mean, really, if I could read your mind, that would make my life so easy, right? No, I can't read your mind. Relax. You have to, you have organized so many booby traps and made it so difficult to get in that, you're safe. It's going to take a while. The other thing is, people are very not interested in taking medicine, but they will eventually show up in my office because they're miserable. They're also not interested in exploring any kind of behavior that might get them into trouble. So my job really is to establish the trust. It's just to say, you're in charge of the pacing. I'm not going to make you take any medicine. I can't make you do anything. We're going to have a conversation about why I think you might need medicine, how I think it might benefit you. If you agree, then, we're in business. If you don't agree, of course, that means you've rejected my recommendation. And that means treatment's not possible. I mean, you know, as a psychiatrist, I'm not seeing people who don't need medicine. You know, they have a symptom burden high enough that they've actually been referred to me, or have had failures with their primary care doc. You know, they're miserable. So they've already, what I say to people about medicine is, listen, if you decide to take medicine, you're in for a penny, in for a pound. You don't get to tell me, no, I don't want to take more medicine. No, I don't want to increase the dose. You've already decided that you're going to engage, you're going to take this to help you. And then you need to let me use my skill set to manipulate that. That's what I trained for 8 years for.
Great.
And, you know, this is all psychotherapy, you know, on some level, is engaging people and working through their fears.
Now, you know, when you talk about what you do for a living, you do seem to emphasize a bit that you're a rural psychiatrist. And we have a couple of minutes here, and I would like to know what you feel is the difference between having a rural practice versus, you know, an urban practice, and why people should, you know, what people should understand about that.
Well, I trained in the Bronx. I trained in New York City. And then when I finished my residency, I had an Upper West Side practice. And, you know, I was very surprised when we relocated to our tiny rural town of 23,000 to find how similar the whole process was. I mean, you know, I've worked with farmers. I've worked with, you know, the mayor. I've worked with teenage dropout, high school dropout. And, you know, my practice in Manhattan was, you know, movers and shakers, but there's movers and shakers everywhere, and there's intelligent people everywhere, and it doesn't really matter. You know, therapy can benefit anyone who is interested in learning what it is that they're doing that gets them into trouble. And that, you know, that doesn't require that you know, be middle class. It doesn't require that you live in a city. It doesn't require, you know, anything beyond being a human being, right? And opening your mind. And so I have been delighted to find how fruitful, you know, being in this small town, how fruitful the work is. Really the difference between living in a large town and a large city and a small town is personal. I run into patients all the time out in the community. And that's part of what I address in the book too, you know, the overlap. I end up working with a patient on a PTO project at our son's school, and that was like a learning curve. So, you know, that's really, the rural piece is really more about how being a psychiatrist, a person of interest in a small town, interfaces with the world.
Yes, that is, I can really understand it. It's so much more personal, and I suppose that brings with it a lot of rewarding and challenging aspects. Now, unfortunately, we could keep talking to you, Daniela, but I want people to know that you can buy her book, Practice, 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 This Psychiatrist's Life by Dr. Daniela Gitlin, Gitlin. And it just was published in February, leap year. And it's I can't even tell you how engaging it is. I really enjoyed reading it. Daniela, how can people best get a hold of you before we sign off?
I blog at danielagitlin.com. And that's, you know, the best way to get a hold of me. And if you can get the book on Amazon.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you
for tuning in, everybody. And we'll see you again next time on It's All Right with Suzette.